Hello everybody, and welcome to another episode of Summer of Chess. Today's game was against a fellow American. This game was a terrible game for me. I've been very tired. I worked today. Of course, I'm just coming up with excuses, but it truly was a terrible match. The fact that I used is simply so I could show you just how terrible this was. I ended up winning the game, amazingly enough, but I made so many judgmental errors that I'm surprised I did so. Even against an opponent that's as seemingly weak as this person. I am on white, my opponent is on black, and I begin with my typical c3. He begins with king's pawn, so I move up queen's pawn to d4. He takes, I take, and he offers an immediate trade of queens. I accept this as to double up on his pawns here. Of course, he could have taken it with his knight, but he did not. From there, I move my bishop to f4, something new, something I don't typically do. He once again, interestingly enough, offers a trade, and so I once again accept, now doubling up both the D and the F file, still keeping his king completely vulnerable here. So I go ahead and castle with the idea that I want to threaten this. Of course, there isn't a lot he can do about that unless he moves his king, so he moves his knight, so I take, he castles, and I take the other pawn, now up 2 points immediately. From there, he moves his knight to g6, and so I move my pawn to e3, opening up this white square bishop. From there, he opens up his b file, exposing this rook, and so I think maybe, you know, I can get a fool's rook off of this. He guards with his knight, so I still move my bishop to g2, assuming that he moved this here so that he could protect. Surprisingly, he did not. He moved his knight to e5, and so I simply take the rook. He moves his bishop to a6 with vision on this diagonal, and I move my bishop back to d5. From there, he moves his knight, threatening this bishop, and I move my pawn, threatening it. So he takes, I take, and he moves his knight. From there, I put him in check by moving my knight to e7. And then I begin moving my g-pawn, hoping to move this pawn out of the way so it can be taken, and then I can put him in check and make my way from there. I unknowingly open up this pawn for him to take, so I move g5, continue moving this pawn, and he moves his rook. And this is where my biggest mistake comes in. Obviously, I could simply take this with my knight. That would have been the best move for me. Unfortunately, not only did I not take that when I moved to protect this pawn right here, he threatens my rook, and I take the knight, and then that's that. So I was pretty upset about that, and he threatens my knight there, and I pull it back, and he moves a pawn. I take, and of course this is another blunder here because he could just take right back. Very upset with myself here. But amazingly enough, he didn't see this, so I simply pulled my knight back the next move. He moves and takes on c3, and so I take back, and he takes on a2. And so from there, I move my pawn, and instead of taking, like I expected him to, he takes my pawn and puts me in check. So I move, he takes, I take with my knight, check, he moves his king, I pull my knight back, check, I move, check, I move, and then he moves his knight to f2. From here, I go ahead and block it with my knight here. Check, move, he takes my rook, I take his rook, and then he moves his pawn. From there, the best option probably would have been to take the bishop and put him in check, but that is not what I did. I actually put him in check with my rook, allowing him to move his king to f6, and of course, because this is this game, I make another blunder. I move my rook to g6 check, completely forgetting that he can simply take it with his bishop, and then when I take back, he takes with his king. So from here, I'm still up 3 points, but it was quite a loss for me, and I still am very upset about it. How I could blunder so badly like a complete amateur. I move knight to d4 with the idea that I can move here and protect this. So, but first I move my king to f3 to protect this pawn. He moves, and so of course I move here. He moves once more to a2, one step from promotion, and so I begin pushing my pawn. he immediately attacks my h-pawn, and I move to protect my pawn on the f-file. He takes, so I move my pawn up, and he actually moves down. This is a terrible blunder from him, and one that essentially lost him the game. He's heading for my knight, and in that time I can simply promote. By the time he reaches my knight, I put him in check and move him. I actually have to give up my knight at this point, because he wants to take it, and if he does, then this can promote. So he takes the knight, and I move, and he protects the pawn. I move my king up to push and take, and then of course I move my king over. And this is where things get a little better. He moves here, I move right there, and as you can see, there's only one place for him to move, that is up. And then when I take here, this is checkmate, and absolutely nowhere for him to go. And that's the game.